It's August 4th, 2025, and the tropics just exploded with activity. And here's the National Hurricane Center's tropical outlook, and we can see we have one, two, three areas of interest, which is crazy because only 2 days ago we had zero. And our invest right off the coast of the Carolinas actually has a 70% chance of formation. Now, interestingly, this actually isn't expected to impact the US at all. It's just expected to become a fish storm as it pushes out in the Atlantic. Our second greatest area of expected development is down here in the main development region, which has a 40% chance of formation. But the likelihood of this impacting the United States isn't looking super large. And if it were to, it wouldn't impact for probably the next couple of weeks. Now, ironically, I think that our area, which currently has the lowest probability of formation, is actually the storm to watch. And currently, it only has a 20% chance of formation. But if it were to form, it would likely impact a lot of the eastern coast all the way up into New England. But currently, this is just something to keep an eye on and not really worry about. And then we also have a pretty decently sized risk of severe weather today. We have a marginal risk which spans all the way from the US-Canada border all the way back into the Texas panhandle. And other areas which could see some strong storms would be pretty much anywhere from northeastern to central Texas and also down here in the southeast as well. And then this risk is mostly going to be driven by the threat of some damaging winds. Currently, it only spreads about half our marginal risk area, but I do think it will absolutely span down into the Texas panhandle once the Storm Prediction Center upgrades this outlook. And currently it is only for the conditional threat of some 60-mile-an-hour damaging winds. But I do think our environment could actually yield some storms producing up to 70-mile-an-hour damaging gusts. And that would specifically be stretching from the Texas panhandle all the way up into southern South Dakota. And our hail risk does span our entire marginal risk area. Currently, it's only for the conditional threat of some hail in excess of 1 inch in diameter. But in that same risk area that I pointed out for the threat of seeing some 70-mile-an-hour damaging gusts, I also do think there could be the possibility of seeing some large hail in excess of 1.5 to 2 inches in diameter. And lastly, the Storm Prediction Center has not outlined a specific tornado risk today, but I do think there is definitely still the possible threat of a couple of tornadoes with a couple of mesoscale convective systems which do develop throughout the day. And then today, for pretty much everywhere in the US but Texas and the Gulf Coast, it's going to be some very nice weather with anywhere between 75 to 85 feels like temperatures. But unfortunately for our friends down here in Texas and the Gulf Coast, it's still going to be high 90s to low 100s feels like temperatures. Then also as we go into the week, we're going to start to see the Great Plains warm up as well. And today there will actually be a pretty significant threat of flash flooding down here in parts of the southeast, specifically in southeastern Alabama, southern Georgia, and even the northern portion of Florida, specifically the panhandle, where we could see widespread 2 to 5 inches of rain, with a couple of isolated areas predicted to even be around 7 inches, and that would be within this slight risk right here. Then we have a couple of isolated marginals spanning all the way from Montana, Minnesota, the Ohio River Valley, then an associated one with our main risk area down here in the southeast. Then in those, there's just the conditional threat of seeing 1 to 2 inches of rain today. And here's what the radar could look like in our main risk area out here in the upper plains today. We're going to see some storm initiation along a stationary boundary and initiated by some westerly flow and shortwave action around the mid to late afternoon today with an initially pretty discrete mode actually. And this is why I do think there is a threat for potentially some very large hail, even around 2 inches in diameter, and a couple of isolated 70-mile-an-hour damaging gusts, because the environment is going to be very conducive for that. Now, a lot of these storms won't last very long and will likely be done by the evening hours, but it does look like we could have a couple of mesoscale convective systems develop, one specifically out here in parts of southern South Dakota, which would push into parts of Nebraska, then another one pushing southward in the Texas panhandle. Now with this, I do think there could potentially be a weak spin-up tornado threat, because this will occur when the low-level jet is kicking in, but there would mostly be the threat of some damaging winds. I wouldn't be surprised to see a 70-mile-an-hour gust with these, and then the hail threat with this would likely only be for 1 to 1.5 inches in diameter. And both of these could actually last a fairly decent time, even into early Tuesday morning. And then moving northward into our Montana risk area, we could actually see a pretty significant line of storms develop out here in eastern Montana around the late afternoon to evening hours. And this would be mostly initiated by a short wave pushing through the region, and this would likely mostly bring the threat for some damaging gusts around 60 to 65 miles an hour, and also the threat of some small hail not likely being over 1 inch in diameter. Then other areas which could see a couple of strong storms would be parts parts of eastern Texas, even near the DFW Metroplex, with a couple of storms along a stationary boundary, which could possibly bring some strong gusts and even some small hail. And then, of course, there's that mesoscale convective system, which is supposed to push southward through the Texas Panhandle all the way into Tuesday morning today as well. And then, of course, out here in the southeast, where we could actually see a pretty significant flooding threat evolve, there is also going to be the threat of a couple of strong storms, which would pretty much be for our main southeastern states, that being Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, and even the Florida Panhandle. And then here are 500 millibar winds. These are going to help to initiate some of our storms, and immediately we're going to see quite a bit of flow out here across our upper plains risk area, which is going to help to bring quite a bit of organizing shear and also help to initiate those storms out there. We also do see a pretty negatively tilted shortwave pushing through our Montana risk area, which would be the reason for those storm initiation. Then we also see that lingering high pressure system over the southwest, which is also going to help to pinch a lot of our flow, which is actually going to help to enhance it and also bring some organizing shear. Then we actually see a shortwave pushing through our southeastern risk area, which is definitely something you don't usually see out here this time of year. And then this is the storm environment out here in the upper plains today, and it's just going to be a classic high-based windbag and hail setup. We're going to see a fairly straight hodograph with tons of organizing shear nearing even anywhere between 50 to 60 knots, which is extremely high. So definitely a lot of organized storms with some very powerful updrafts. And we also see some wind veering, which only further amplifies the risk of that. We also have a fairly high LCL, which is going to be the reason for that high-based storm mode. And then feeling our hail threat further are going to be our fairly high mid-level lapse rates at around 8.6 Celsius decreasing per kilometer and quite a bit of CAPE up here near our freezing level. Then we also just have a very moist environment for the region, 65 dew point, and a pretty unstable environment at around 4,000 CAPE. So just very favorable things for severe weather in general. Now for our damaging wind threat, feeling it, it's going to be some dry air loft and extremely high downdraft CAPE of 1,800. That is actually really high. And then a relative humidity around 50%, which could further amplify that risk with evaporative cooling. Then a precipitable water at 1.44 inches, which also isn't low either. So it looks like it's just going to be a classic high-based windbag and hail setup out here in the upper plains for potentially some 70-mile-an-hour wind gust and 2-inch in diameter hail. And for the couple of mesoscale convective vortexes, which are expected to develop around the evening hours, there is some curvature in our hodograph, and this would be likely to grade in when the low-level jet kicks in, and those storms would also likely be a bit more lower based because of the cloud tops extending in front of them, further lowering that. So I wouldn't be surprised to see a potential threat for a couple of weak spin-up tornadoes with our mesoscale convective vortexes, which do develop. And in our Montana risk area, it's going to be a lot of the same stuff. It's just going to be a high-based windbag and hail setup. We do have a very high mid-level lapse rate, 9.0 Celsius decreasing per kilometer, coupled with quite a bit of CAPE up here near our freezing level and a decent amount of bulk shear, 33 knots. So also some strong updrafts. And then we also have some dry air aloft. And then a pretty high downdraft CAPE, 1,600. That's actually also going to be very high, coupled with a low relative humidity, so some evaporative cooling with that. And then we also just have a fairly moist environment for the region and the elevation, and a modestly unstable environment at around 2,000 CAPE. So just very favorable for a high-based hail and windbag setup and some severe weather up here in Montana. And that's it for today's forecast discussion. If you enjoyed, please consider liking and subscribing. And remember to stay safe and weather aware. And I'll see you in tomorrow's forecast discussion.